My name is Raul Rangel, and I am a fan of comedy, both in stand-up and on film. And I'm a fan of all types of comedy, from Monty Python to I'm Gonna Get You Sucker. I even love dad jokes. As a fact, I'd like to start you off on a dad joke. Did you hear about the restaurant on the moon? It had no atmosphere. I know it's cheesy, but it's also not very funny. When I was a kid, my favorite comedy was Blazing Saddles. It is a Mel Brooks classic about an African American sheriff in a western town trying to save it from a gang of ruthless thugs. Along the way, there are crude racial, gender, and sexual preference jokes that are not for the faint of heart. And one of the funniest scenes in the film, a bunch of cowboys are sitting around a campfire, they're eating beans and just relaxing. Also, they are farting all over the place. And in the scene, everyone's just farting away. To me, this is one of the greatest cinematic art since Citizen Kane. The film pulls no punches. It makes jokes on everyone, saying that nothing is sacred and all will be made fun of. A couple months ago, I was listening to an interview on comedic films and their influence. The host and the guest started talking about the brilliance of the film. Then both men agreed that a film like this could not be made in this day and age. And it had me thinking, are we really that far off from joking about sensitive issues that we have to censor what may or may not be funny? My first thought was wondering if the reason that they might not find the film funny or be able to come out this time of age is because people think it was written by a bunch of white men that were looking to make fun of, they're looking for a movie that would for cheap laughs at minorities. But if you look at the film, you will see it was co-written by an African American named Richard Pryor, and it was directed by a Jewish director named Mel Brooks. It also had several actors in the film that were homosexual. Now, what is it that people would want to censor this film for? Society has become its own worst enemy. Instead of coming together and having a laugh, we are now joining with the government to censor what people should be deemed as comedy and what is appropriate. So what I want to show you is that humor, when censored, has the opposite effect of perceived protection. Ever since comedy has been around, it has always pushed the boundaries of the limits. Whether it be using certain types of language, talking about the opposite sex, or even single mother having a child out of wedlock. But one man who was the king of obscenities was Lenny Bruce. Lenny was a stand-up comedian that started working blue and became a target for police to come and raid clubs during his show whenever Bruce was working. At one show, police arrested the audience for being at the show itself. One of the members in the audience was a young man who refused to give up his ID because he didn't think he needed to. That man became known as George Carlin. George Carlin later on became a comedian and started working the clubs and later on would work stadiums, arenas and big theaters. One time he made a joke called the 7 dirty words you cannot say on television. Now I'm going to spare you the words, but trust me, it's a fantastic bit. Now the purpose of this bit was to inform people listening to the ludicrous wording and what the government deemed acceptable and not acceptable to say on the air. This bit lasted throughout Carlin's career. But stand-up was not the only area of comedy that the government went after. In May of 1992, during the LA riots that were tearing up the city and the country, then Vice President Dan Quayle had a speech about a television show called Murphy Brown and how it was immoral. Now, what was the crime of immoral thing that they had done, you may ask? Language? Nudity? Talk natively about a religion? No. The immoral subject was that a single woman gave birth to a child out of wedlock. Since this was during the time of the LA riots, and the vice president equated the show with the majority of the protesters that were predominantly African American. As he stated in his speech, It doesn't help matters when primetime television has Murphy Brown, a character who supposedly epitomizes the intelligent, highly paid professional woman mocking the importance of fathers by bearing a child and calling it just another lifestyle choice. Now, government censorship is always a bad thing. But when we start to censor each other, then that sends us down a rabbit hole of turning in people for speech and thought. In the summer of 2019, a comedian named Shane Gillis was announced as the newest cast member of the show Saturday Night Live. However, an old podcast of his was found, where he did some offensive material towards Asians. This led to a backlash and immediately got him fired before even appearing on the show. Now, this led to comedians immediately firing back at critics and people calling for the firing of Gillis. In reality, this made Gillis a household name. Before the coronavirus, he was selling out comedy clubs across the nation. Even Asian American comedians came out in defense of Gillis, who said that nothing should be off limits when it comes to making a joke. You may not like it, but nothing should be off limits. Howard Stern was always chased by the FCC. But when he made a joke about slaying Tejano star Selena, Hispanic groups came after Stern. They caused him to lose sponsors and started boycotting the products that were sponsoring the Howard Stern show. But in effect, this had the opposite effect towards everything. As a matter of fact, Howard Stern at this time got more ratings than what he had previously. He also gained more sponsorships because now it was free enough sponsorship ad time for him. Networks also had a one-time censor comedians for some things that they may seem controversial. During its heyday, the I Love Lucy show was the #1 show in television. However, when it came to scenes in their bedroom, the studios wanted them to continue using twin beds instead of one bed. At the time, one bed always said that this couple had sex, even though they may have been married. That's why you saw like shows like Leave It to Beaver, where they had twin beds. But after the birth of their son on television, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz decided to get rid of it. They wanted to show that they were a normal couple, just like everybody else. So out went the twin beds and in came the one bed. Now, for Ricky, Lucy wasn't always the one in bed next to him, but that's a TED Talk for another time. The Smothers Brothers had a #1 show for CBS and were clean cut in all their acts. As a matter of fact, they didn't swear any time on stage. They wrote satirical songs about life and politics that seemed funny and lighthearted at the time. But when they took a stance against the Vietnam War on one of their political songs, that's when CBS decided to fire them. This was early in the Vietnam War, so they decided that they weren't going to take a chance on getting a backlash, and yanked them off the air. They were basically blacklisted from performing on CBS ever again. Now, I say these things because there is a silver lining to censorship, and that is the comeback. The show Opie and Anthony were fired at one time for a stunt in which people claimed to have had sex in a cathedral for the show. It was later determined that there was no proof, but yet they still decided to fire Opie and Anthony from the radio. They were suspended for 2 years, and at the end of their contract, they were let go. They went on to XM radio satellite for a lot of money. They became multimillionaires from this deal. Also, satellite radio was brand new, so it gave them the kind of freedom that they wanted to speech and talk about in comedy. Now, a big fan of theirs would go on their show and love to talk to them. And they had a certain way of doing interviews and getting to know people and just talking about everything. That man later on went to make his own podcast. It is called the Joe Rogan Experience, and he credits Opie and Anthony for helping him get his start. Howard Stern later left radio as well to go to satellite, and basically became a billionaire overnight. Bill Maher had a show on on ABC called Politically Incorrect. However, on one of those episodes, he did say something politically incorrect. He was let go by the network, and then went to HBO where he has been for 16 years. Now, these examples show that there is an audience for entertainment that may seem crass and juvenile, but people yearn to just have a laugh and forget about the bad times in their life and the horrible situations that are going on in the world. Maybe a fart joke is something we can use in life right now. Thank you.